Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
There's a historical pattern that starts there. Now, you mentioned, the theory revolution of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Certainly, that exacerbated what was already there. But what you had was the largest generation in the history of academia being taught to keep its head down. And here's the thing about academia: even after the conditions that might have made keeping your head down into an understandable strategy, a prudent strategy, even after those conditions disappeared, the habit remained. That the thing about academia is that once you get into the habit of doing something, you do it because you've always done it that way. And if you haven't heard, we've done it this way because this is the way we've always done it in academia, you haven't been in academia for very long.
Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Andrew. I am so excited to let you all know that we are now in the top 40 best liberal arts podcasts list that got sent to me, and we're number 3. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. And I just really appreciate that you keep spreading the word. So please make sure you follow us on social media. Instagram is Ivory Tower Boiler Room, TikTok, Dr. Rimby, and please review us on Apple, Spotify. It really, all of it helps. So I hope you just enjoy this episode. And as always, remember, there is an ad-free version on our Patreon. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby, joined with, I would consider him the public intellectual extraordinaire in academia. I absolutely have admired Dr. Leonard Cassuto's work for a long time. I was talking to him about having been introduced to his work at Stony Brook, specifically when we were talking about how to make ourselves publicly visible as recently minted PhDs. So to let you all know, if you don't know about Leonard Cassuto, he's a professor of English at Fordham University. He writes a regular column called The Graduate Advisor for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and his many books include The New PhD, How to Build a Better Graduate Education. So that's the book that I looked at during my time at Stony Brook. And then what we're here to talk about is his recent book called Academic Writing as If Readers Matter, which, as you'll learn from him, might be a little controversial to some in academia, but I'm sure, he'll blow the roof off of that idea. So, Len, it's really wonderful to have you here.
I'm really glad that you could have me. It's good to be here.
Well, so I was just curious, this whole idea of the public intellectual, how did this enter your stratosphere? Like, is this something you had always kind of been bridging the divide between, like you call it, the town and the gown relations? Like, was that even something you were interested in during your graduate work, or did it kind of come to you over the years?
I was always interested in it, surely, but I think that I didn't let myself pursue it until after I got tenure. There are graduate students and junior faculty who are braver than I was during those years, but I suppose that in some ways it's a bravery born of necessity, because the academic job market now is so straitened, so desiccated that it scarcely deserves to be called a market. And so the idea of taking a chance in order to be seen makes a lot of sense. When I was starting out, things were bad, but not that bad. And the idea of taking a chance, at least from where I was sitting, it didn't seem like a requirement. And so I played it safe. I got lucky. I fell into the gravy. I got a job. And then I put my head down for 5 years to do the kinds of things that I needed to do in order to keep that job. And then
Mm.
once I was able to assure myself of keeping it, then what I now recognize as a dormant but not dead desire woke up. It woke up while I was in Africa. I was on a Fulbright lectureship teaching in East Africa,
Mm.
and I was writing what would today be called blog posts, but there was no such thing as the internet at that point. So it was blogging before the term was known. And when people started passing around my emails about life in Africa, I remembered that I wanted to be a writer. And when I came back and I started asking myself, what kind of professor do I want to be when I grow up? That's when I started crafting an identity that had, I think, one foot on either side, on each side of the divide.
Mm. Do you feel like there's a an issue like with even the language of the academic versus the non-academic, like kind of making the non-academic community into this um like does it kind of even reinforce a wall up with the university community, like by treating the general public as those who wouldn't be interested in academic conversations?
Let's talk about those metaphors. The idea of academia as a container where you're either in it or out of it.
Hmm.
James Van Wyck, who is a dean of professional development for graduate students at Princeton, has written a really good article that dissects our tendency to use those metaphors of containment and how prescriptive they can be. That really academia is a membrane. It's not a container. It's a membrane that we ought to be able to pass through back and forth, as some people do. And I think the sustainable future of academic work and of the academy really lies in our collective ability to recognize and exploit that fact that academia certainly gained a tradition as a walled off space, and that tradition is very old. That the oldest college campuses in the United States, think about Harvard, uh, were built, and the Harvard was built on the model of the quadrangle that was being established by Oxford and Cambridge already.
Hmm.
That the earliest versions of Harvard, they didn't have enough money to do the whole quad, but that's what they had in mind. The quad as an enclosed community where where people could live and study and essentially be cloistered. And there's a way that this borrows also from the ancient European idea of the university as a cloister.
Hmm.
The European ideal of the university is an institution that lies between church and state. This is how it's still viewed in many ways. But the American college, the American university, has never occupied that space. One of the distinctive aspects of American academia is that American colleges and universities have always been in the market. They're
Hmm.
not churches. They're not cloisters, or at least they haven't been designed to be. They're institutions whose survival depends on their viability in a market in competition against each other. And that fact has shaped a highly distinctive history of American academia. And to the extent that we fall into an unquestioned acceptance of the idea of academia as a container that keeps us in and them out, we're not only serving ourselves and our students poorly, we're not serving the idea of what American higher education is in the best, most sustainable, most viable way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Len. And I, well, first, I love what James does on LinkedIn. in his work. That's how I like keep track of these conversations. You as well have a very nice spotlight on LinkedIn. And
I will
yeah,
say with pride that James is my former PhD student.
mm, okay. So something else that I feel like what you just talked about, I've been thinking a lot about is why do you think there has been just this writing style, this maybe someone would call it performative in ways of having language, having discourse that just like actually does keep people out. Like I'm thinking of so much theory that you read during grad studies that, from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, a lot of that wouldn't fly right now or be published in this current moment because it is so inaccessible. But for a lot of us, when we entered our studies, that was kind of seen as the exemplar of, oh, if you confuse your reader, if you create a puzzle and you're trying to decipher it, that actually is a benefit. Like, how did that kind of even become in vogue to have just really confusifying language in academia?
Academic writing, I would say, is both performative, as you say, and also defensive. It's defensive against being understood too readily. And there is an implicit assumption behind that is that if you can understand it easily, it must not be smart. So
Mm,
that's a conventional belief that evolved much to the detriment of everyone involved. But I think it does have a history. It's a history that I think we need to go back to the Cold War in order to understand fully.
mm,
The Cold War doesn't explain everything, but it explains a number of things. There are two major developments in American academia during the Cold War. Now I'm going to put my historian's hat on. One of them is that American academia got very big and very wealthy in the post-war era because the government started investing in it as a research and development lab. So a lot of money was coming in, and it was a time when the sector was growing faster than it will ever grow again. I will offer one statistic in support of that, rather than get bogged down in them. There were more academic jobs, which is to say professorships, created during the single decade of the 1960s than in the 300 plus year history of American academia leading up to the 1960s.
mm.
That is, more jobs in that 10-year period than in the entire history of the institution up to
Wow.
that point. That gives you an idea of how fast it was growing because government money was pouring in abundance because the government was investing in universities in order to do a lot of the work that it had previously invested elsewhere to have done or simply did not do. For the investments in not only things like agriculture but also in weapons technology and other the space race and and other uh, Cold War developments that became national priorities. So that's one thing that was happening during the Cold War. You
Mm,
had the sector was growing, and it was growing so fast that necessitated the growth of a bureaucracy that had previously not existed in American academia because it didn't have to. You don't have to bureaucratize an institution that's small enough where people know each other. But
mm,
when people start pouring in numbers, then you have to figure out ways to assess them and to categorize them that you didn't have before.
mm,
The and so excuse me. The other major development during the Cold War was that the McCarthy-era witch hunts came for not only actors and directors and writers in Hollywood, but also professors.
mm,
So there were a lot of prurient inquiries there were loyalty oaths that professors were asked to take, were required to take, actually, not just asked. More professors lost tenure during that period in the 1950s than in any other time in the history of American academia, with the exception of today, the present day. The present day has its serious, very serious problems and threats. And one of them is that the developments are recalling McCarthyism. So McCarthyism was a great threat to professors who were doing public-facing research that could create political disagreement, particularly with the communist hunting right. So for humanists and social scientists especially, this period in the 1950s threw them into a defensive crouch. They didn't want their work to be legible to people who were looking for to make prurient examples out of professors who were allegedly misbehaving. And so the humanities and the social sciences turned inward in that respect, and professors went into a defensive crouch. Now, remember that this is happening at the same time that the institution is growing like crazy, and people are coming in and they're being socialized into the academic community. These include demographics that had never been able to consider college or graduate school before. That's the result of government subsidies. The GI Bill being the first most notable of those. There were a number of them over that generation. So if you have a combination of a defensive crouch and the growth of a bureaucracy, you can see how this could create a kind of new tradition as the newest and largest generation ever is being socialized into a profession that's changing rapidly, whose denizens are counseling that they turn inward and keep to themselves and not make themselves visible or legible to careless, glory-hounding government authorities who are looking to make examples of them. There's a historical pattern that starts there. Now, you mentioned the theory revolution of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Certainly that exacerbated what was already there. But what you had was the largest generation in the history of academia being taught to keep its head down. And here's the thing about academia. Even after the conditions that might have made keeping your head down into an understandable strategy, a prudent strategy, even after those conditions disappeared, the habit remained. That the thing about academia is that once you get into the habit of doing something, you do it because you've always done it that way. And if you haven't heard, we've done it this way because this is the way we've always done it in academia, you haven't been in academia for very long. That's just the way it is. And so the habits remained after the urgency passed. And the result, this is my story and I'm sticking to it. I mean, it's a history. It has data points for sure. There's no archive where you can find professors saying, I've decided to write defensively because I'm worried that the government is out to get me. And there's for sure this happened.
It's clear, yeah. And in a way also, does it kind of also tie into legitimizing the realm of what they were thinking of academic writing should be is, well, if we only are writing for those who can understand it, we don't have to fear that those from the general public will, like, we're not really going to make a wave outside of this community.
Certainly. And also, if you're writing just for people who understand it, you're going to use terms that are understandable within that community, but not outside it, which is the very definition of jargon. Jargon is not necessarily a bad thing. If you're talking to everybody if your audience is comprised entirely of members of a community who understand what you're talking about, then jargon is not uncivil or defensive. It's simply efficient. That if you have a group of lawyers or judges who are throwing around legal terms like stare decisis, which means following precedent, then they will all understand it. They all learned it in law school. And so it's not somebody showing off or trying to exclude and calling attention to people who don't know the meaning of that term, because everybody does. But if a lawyer or a judge is speaking to an audience that's mixed or simply isn't lawyers, and the speaker uses terms like that, then the jargon becomes a weapon. It's a weapon that says, stay away from me. I know things you don't know, and I'm not interested in having you know them. I'm interested in having you admire me from afar as somebody who knows things that you don't. And so you can therefore walk away from this talk saying, wow, boy, isn't he smart, without actually knowing what I said.
Well,
And the extent to which audience members are willing to take that crap is disturbing, but it's something they learn in school from their less effective teachers who aren't going to reach out to them, who are instead going to show off.
Well, and like as I was finishing my dissertation, a lot of the advice that I was getting, which my dissertation is on Whitman and Wilde and like queer poetics, ancient Greek influences, mostly with Whitman. But like when I entered a term or introduced a term into the discourse, like heteronormative, like right away, I was taught, oh, define the term, because I was also really focused and I had a lot of conversations with my advisor. I'm writing this because I want this to be something that could cross over into a trade press or at least be academic, published academically, but maybe it could bridge the gap. And it does seem like I mean, what have you seen about recent PhD work? Do you feel that in literary studies or in the humanities, there is more of a focus to now make the language engaging and, in your terms, enjoyable to read? Why does anything exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? I think that's a question we all, as curious people, have asked ourselves. And let me tell you, Professor Stephen A. Simon's new book is so thought-provoking that I can't wait for you all to pick it up. He provides his experience as a professor of political science and philosophy to explore that question with such a variety of perspectives from science, religion, philosophy, and even mathematics. He helps us understand what could possibly explain the most fundamental fact of all, that anything exists. So you can get this from broadviewpress.com. The floodgates have opened with science fiction as a genre in my life because I owe this to my husband and I'm going to give him credit. He has really gotten me to think more about sci-fi, film, and literature. I have to say, Minority Report, absolutely amazing. And Alien, I mean, who doesn't love that alien coming out of that human body in the first film? So Professor Jason Haslam's new anthology provides a lot of exploration with all different short fiction, so many sci-fi authors, over 200 years, including sci-fi that explores indigenous futurism, feminist science fiction, Afrofuturism. Again, you can get this on broadviewpress.com. And last but not least, my upcoming episode with Professor Matthew James Wachinsky explores his book, which is Original Inquiry, A Guide to Research for Undergraduates, a great toolkit for all faculty out there who are just trying to find a book that helps their students understand how to collect research sources and then, right, the hardest part, build and organize their essay with all of these sources and to make a cohesive argument. I can't recommend Original Inquiry highly enough. So again, all three books can be found on broadviewpress.com. Use the promo code Ivory Tower for 20% off.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Well, I'm going to say accessible because I may be, maybe I have to read a history of engineering because I'm writing something about science. Maybe I'm interested in the history of engineering. Maybe I'm not. Let's assume I'm not, but I have to know it anyway. So I'm going to read it, and it won't necessarily be enjoyable for me, but if it's accessible, then it will be something that I can absorb easily. I hear you describing your dissertation as the first draft of a future book, which is fine. Many dissertations are first drafts of future books. And that's as it should be. Many dissertations are not future books, which is also as it should be. So the question of who's going to read your dissertation, the answer to that one is pretty simple. The number of people who will read a PhD student's dissertation from end to end, whom that PhD student does not share DNA with or a bed, is normally fewer than 5. The people who are going to judge that dissertation and assess it whether it's creditable. But if it is if it's being written as a first draft of a book, then certainly the writer benefits from thinking about its future audience, not its present audience, but its future audience, a draft or 2 or 3 or 4 down the line. It's good to start out with your future audience in mind. If you know that your dissertation is something that's only going to get you a degree and doesn't otherwise have a future in your own intellectual life, be it scholarly or professional or otherwise, then your job is to write it clearly, but you don't necessarily have to reach beyond those 5 people who are going to judge whether it's creditable. And in a situation like that, where everybody knows what the term heteronormative means in that small group, that's an example of jargon as efficient. But if you're writing it because you're hoping that somebody is going to wander into one of the few brick and mortar bookstores that are left in the world, pick it up, look in the back on the back cover and say, ooh, this is the kind of exploration of queer sexuality and queer art that interests not only me, but also my daughter and her friends, then you're going to be writing differently. It's all about the question of who's going to read it. Hence the title of this book.
Yes, thinking of the readers. Well, and also I think to take as a case study, Judith Butler, I think they're an interesting case study because Judith Butler's Gender Trouble is full of jargon, is full of language that, really shaped feminist studies in the literary space, particularly. But now Judith Butler has really embraced being a public intellect. Again, I don't know. It's kind of like you said, Len. Would that have happened earlier in the career? I don't know. But
Judith Butler is a wonderful example because not only when Butler first started out, not only was their writing impenetrable, but and required an enormous amount of work to get through, but Butler was defiant about it, said basically that they had to write this way because there was no other way to write. no other way to communicate these ideas, for which Butler took a lot of shit. And I think rightly so. Now, that's the first thing to say. Now, something that I want to say at the outset here is that I am not suggesting that Butler was a bad writer, because a writer who gets their audience, as Butler did, who is able to gain and keep that audience's attention, is not a bad writer. There's communication that has been happening between Butler and their audience from square one. Butler has always managed to forge a connection with their audience, but it's awfully risky to write that way and expect that kind of connection. Most people will never get it. Butler gained a huge audience, and so I'm not going to say Butler is a bad writer. Butler clearly has managed to capture lightning in a bottle. However, as I said years ago in the gender trouble period, Butler proclaimed defiantly that this was the only way to write. More recently, as you've said, Butler's style is completely different. It's much more generous. And Butler herself has apologized for their earlier sentences in an interview with the New York Times in, I think, 2024. And that apology, I think, is tremendously admirable. For somebody in Butler's position who doesn't have to apologize for a book, for a series of books that have gained enormous audiences and had enormous influence, to apologize for the way that they've written, that those books were written, takes, I think, a tremendous amount of not only guts, but also humility.
Yeah. Yeah, Butler is a real one. I've had communication with Butler, a real, like, yes, a really, like you said, has a lot of humility. And Who's Afraid of Gender has made a lot of conversations in the general public who are interested. I mean, well, and also has opened themselves up to scrutiny, like to a larger demographic. And I did want to ask you, Len, is that a fear that you think some academics, they have a fear of being openly criticized by the public if their work is accessible?
Yeah, well, they have a fear of being criticized by all different publics, and starting with their own academic public. Now, as I said, put me on record as an admirer of Butler.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that I admire Butler is because Butler is doing something now that so many younger academics are afraid to do. They are afraid to reach out towards an audience because they're afraid that that audience, whether it be that the core audience of professional experts or a larger audience, might say, "Whew, you're not that smart."
Wow.
We're talking about a business, a workplace, in which people forego the chance to make a lot of money in exchange for a chance to get a lot of prestige. In the academic workplace, prestige stands for money, not only on the individual level, but also on the institutional level. Every university, every college or university worthy of the name is a nonprofit. They're not trying to make money. But what they are trying to do is move up in the rankings. And that's what individuals are trying to do too. They're wanting to move up in their own professional pecking orders. And so if you put your prestige on the line and somebody says you suck, then that's the equivalent of being mugged and having your pockets emptied. People are understandably nervous about doing that. They want to amass capital so that they can traffic easily in their professional, and I will say here, disciplinary workspaces.
Do you think that with the economy, with the shrinking of tenure track positions, or even just non-existent tenure track positions, you're lucky if there's lecturer positions offered? I mean, I work at 3 part-time colleges. And I'm very satisfied because I also have my creative freedom over the podcast and have had conversations with full-time faculty of how that might pan out if I was full-time I mean, we have academic freedom. I put that in air quotes. I hope we preserve academic freedom. But do you think that because of that necessity, you kind of did allude to this earlier, that it has pushed younger academics like myself to create public facing projects like a podcast or like something in the digital space, like that it's actually broken up the gatekeeping system of academia?
I agree with you up to a point. That is to say, I'm glad and grateful that you found a space where you can express yourself. And I'm glad to be part of that right now in real time. So, however, I think that you'll agree that for every one of you who has found this not only equilibrium, but creative space, there are many who are struggling to try to catch a fingerhold on a pole that is becoming increasingly greasy and harder to climb. So I do agree with you that the fragmentation of a previously hierarchical and restrictive academic job market ought to open up the possibility of different and more creative career outlets, what we call career diversity in the professional development space. I'd like to see a lot more of it than I do see.
Yeah. Well, so as I was reading your book, which is, I mean, from the intro, you've kept my attention and you did make it enjoyable. It's so well written. And I love your metaphors and all the figurative devices you're using to explain the writing process of making it accessible. Do you think that, and I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, and I'm thinking a lot of maybe more traditional scholars, which, I never want to discount the work of traditional scholarship, that you can have both. Like, can you have both full-time professors who are in the digital or in the more public space, uh, kind of public engaged work, and also have those who are doing more traditional work? Like, do you see a future where that exists? Looking for summer reads, the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine that features arts and culture conversations about the LGBT community, has you covered. The July and August issue is all about summer getaways and artists. So, for example, there are articles about David Hockney. There's an article about the sculpture in Central Park that some of you, if you've seen Angels in America, definitely recognize, by Emma Stebbins. So I can't wait for you all to get your hands on this issue. As always, there are TV reviews, film reviews, book reviews, theater reviews. So if you just don't know where to begin with LGBTQ literature, this is a great magazine to inspire you to add more books to your to-be-read pile. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review, and I'm so happy because I have a promo code for you. Go to glreview.org and get the print subscription or the digital subscription and put in ITBR choice for a free issue of the magazine.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Oh, I think it's it ought to be a present, not just a future. That, you know, in my own case, I see the work that I do on a continuum. That I read the stuff that I write for academic audiences and the stuff that I write for general audiences, and I hear myself, I hear my own voice in both cases, and it's the same voice. It's a voice that is simply speaking a little bit differently to one audience versus another, but it is, and I think ought to be, recognizably the same voice because it's the same person. My interests are the same. Think about it this way: that one of the public intellectuals whose career I admire is Louis Menand, who writes frequently for the New Yorker. And Menand has also written for academic publications, for university presses and the like, also for trade presses. I think of Menand as somebody who comes up with an idea, something he wants to write about, and decides what audience he wants to write it for, because he has quite a number of audiences. In my own more modest set of attainments, I've got some version of that going too, that I can write for academic audiences or for general audiences based on which audience I think will be able to benefit most from the version of the idea that I want to share.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a way that every academic, every scholar, every intellectual, public or otherwise, is in the same position, but that some people's interests will incline them much more fully towards one side or another, but that's on the basis of their interests. It's not on the basis of some diktat that comes from above. You're a professor. You can't write for a magazine or a newspaper because that's not what professors do. Well, there's a way that really hasn't been the case ever.
Yeah. Well, and is a lot of, like, because I would hear like a lot of the bureaucratic kind of speech of, you know, you don't take creative risks for your first book because if it's for a trade press, you're not going to be granted, you know, a full-time professor. You're not going to get tenure, for example. I mean, but what do you do with those rules when the system doesn't reflect that?
Well, much of that is lore. That there might be one or two cases where if you publish with the so-called wrong press, you won't get tenure. But I think that those are only at the most elite universities, which are in no way representative of the vast majority of scholarly pursuits. That I think that that as members of any workplace, but particularly the academic workplace, we have a duty to ourselves and to everyone else to surface the assumptions that we live by. That academia, because it's such a traditional place, such a hidebound place in many ways, has a lot of assumptions. And when we surface assumptions, we don't have to change them. They might work. They might still work. But maybe they don't work so well anymore. There's an old story, which I'm fond of telling to academic audiences, that I first read it from a cookbook author, Nigella Lawson. She's a cooking personality, actually. She's on TV too. And she called it the pot roast principle. And the way that Lawson tells it, a little girl sees her mother preparing pot roast for the night's dinner, and the mother is cutting the ends off the pot roast. And so the little girl says, "Why are you doing that?" And so her mother says, "Well, that's the way my mother did it, so you'll have to ask grandma." And so the little girl calls her grandma and says, "Why do you cut the ends off the pot roast?" And her grandmother says, "Well, that's the way my mother did it, so you'll have to talk to your great grandmother." And so this little girl, maybe she's a future academic because she's a good researcher, calls up her great grandma at the assisted living and says, "Why do you cut the ends off the pot roast?" And the great grandmother does not say, "Well, because that's the way my mother did it," and on we go. She says instead, "When your great grandfather and I were first starting out, we were very poor. And so we had this very small apartment, and it had this very small oven. And the only way that we could make the pot roast fit in the oven was to cut the ends off it." And so it's a version of academia. We do it this way because we've always done it this way. But if we surface the assumption that underlies the practice, in this case, we'll stop practicing that way. Every workplace benefits from periodically revisiting its assumptions. Academia, maybe more than most, but academia does it less than most. And the work habits, the expectations of members of the academic workplace ought to be in great flux right now, because what constitutes an academic job, as the example of your own self shows, is itself in flux. And if it means something different to work in the higher education space now, we ought to be examining the assumptions that underlie that work in that space. I don't see enough of that.
Do you think, because I have, faced it, but I'm very good at tuning out. I'm very good at, definitely not listening to the trolls or on social media, or even, those who have their own opinions, to try to like pit people against each other. But they'll say like, well, don't you want a full-time job? Like there's always that kind of idealism, or, well, because this is the way, what you should work towards. And do you think that a lot of academics right now are embracing this? I guess we could call it a transition. Just whatever's going on right now in higher education, out of necessity, but also, like you even said, we're kind of sadly returning to a McCarthy light. I don't know if it's light actually, but a McCarthy renewal type of energy, that it can be really tough to try to establish what your identity is as an academic right now. So,
well, it sure is.
Yeah.
I want to say first that Ellen Schrecker, who is the historian who knows more about McCarthyism in academia than anybody, has described what's going on now as worse than McCarthyism. This is a moment of existential crisis in higher education, but we should not let this moment overshadow the fact that higher education has been at a reckoning for much longer than the current administration has been in office. But there has been a reluctance to embrace that reckoning. You asked, is there a lot more of the kind of creative form of career diversity that you are practicing in your own life? Is there more of it out there? The Council of Graduate Schools is doing a long-term study right now. I hope that they're not the only one, and I don't think that they are, that is trying to give concrete answers to those questions. Surely there is more career diversity now than there was when I was coming into the academic profession. But is there enough? For sure there isn't. I know, I visit a lot of campuses. I see what's going on. I see that I see a lot of faculty who are unwilling to examine the assumptions that underlie the training that they give their graduate students, not just in the humanities.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reform that still needs to happen, but there are blueprints for reform that are out there now that didn't used to be out there. I want to suggest as well that part of what we ought to be looking for is based on, well, I'll start with the fact that that higher education is a culture of evaluation. That people who work in higher education are basically practicing evaluation all day. We're not just evaluating the work that our students do, although we are doing that, of course, and that's central. We evaluate each other. Somebody in my position is evaluating my junior colleagues, sometimes lecturers like yourself. Sometimes I'm evaluating tenure track faculty members for tenure. Sometimes I'm evaluating my more senior colleagues for promotion. Sometimes I am evaluating people from other universities. I get sent their dossiers and I have to write letters that assess their credentials in their applications for tenure and promotion. I get invited sometimes to assess departments or programs where I will go visit for a couple of days at another university and assess usually their English department and then write a report on that. And so on. I assess manuscripts before and after they're published, articles, books. There are book reviews or assessments, but an assessment of a manuscript for a press as the press decides whether to publish it is a different kind of review. It's a culture of evaluation. As I hope that I just suggested, that evaluation takes myriad forms. Now, the word evaluation contains in it the word values. And when we talk about the workplace, we ought to be supporting outcomes that are consistent with our values. But we rarely examine our values. And this is one of the problems that in the new PhD, the previous book that you made reference to at the beginning of this podcast, my co-author, Bob Weisbuck, and I, we talk about how if you're a program director, your budget might be due next week, your schedule might be due next month, but your mission is never due. But your mission is more important than any of those things. Your mission embodies your values. And yet we constantly find reasons to avoid what some people who think about these things more assiduously than I do call mission time. That it's important to carve out mission time to make sure that the mission that we agree that we are in pursuit of is a mission that's consistent with the values that we agree that we hold. I don't see enough of that either.
Well, I do want to get to what provides a lot of, optimism for the times, which is the risk-taking in writing. I found it so refreshing to read how you're encouraging educators to really allow their students to take risks in their writing. But also there's a foundation that the students need to learn before they can take those risks. And as you've been talking during the conversation, I've been thinking, isn't it really interesting that in literary studies, we are studying authors who we find enjoyable, but yet academic writing doesn't reflect a lot of times that enjoyment. So it's like, on the one hand, we're making judgment statements about writers who we love. And on the other hand, why are we not also embracing the academic writers and their prose? But, I'm curious, do you think that this risk-taking idea, not just to teach students, but for academics to take too, using contractions or, there's using I effectively, do you think that it will help kind of not only make writing more accessible to those who are interested in these subjects, outside of academia, but may it provide a shift towards the public understanding I think you call it, the public good, understanding the public good of higher education?
Yeah, so underlying all of the unconventional choices that I advocate for in this book is one overarching idea that writing is an act of communication between a live writer and a live audience. And in this sense, this is something that AI, which we haven't talked about up to this point, AI definitionally can't bring a human sensibility to an act of communication. It can imitate one, but it can't bring one. What distinguishes writing by a human to other humans is that it's a move that's governed by human sensibility. That in the book is this picture of one hand clasping another. Because at the bottom of it, that's what writing is. The writer is reaching out to clasp the hand of the reader to create some kind of human connection. That connection can happen with contractions, it can happen with the use of I, or it cannot, or the writer can forego those things and write in a completely traditional way. What I am advocating, though, is that the writer embrace the human sensibility and understand that in writing, you're seeking to create a circuit with another human or group of humans and make the world bigger as a result, make the world bigger and richer. That if we understand that what we're doing then as a profoundly social act, then it also becomes an optimistic act and a constructive one. And that as the best thing that we can do as writers in any space, academic or otherwise, is to lean into our humanity and also the humanity of our audience so that we can establish the kinds of connections that allow human beings not only to become smarter by learning from each other, but also to become happier by increasing the sources of pleasure that can come from the gaining of that knowledge.
Is that where your optimism lies right now in this current moment, would you say?
Yes, I would say. And also in the, as far as the higher ed workplace, the idea that the conversations are underway. When I first started thinking about these issues, no one was having these conversations. Now we are. Yes, it's late, but our institution is old and sturdy, and I think that it has enough credibility left that if we can orient ourselves towards the light, we can reach it.
Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate you coming on. I can't wait for more people, specifically, those in higher ed, but, if you are someone from the public who just loves, you also enjoy academic writing, or, you're a student.
It's a fun book.
It's a fun book. No, and there's illustrations, like you've shown, there's really helpful tips, a really nice guide. I think that,
And it's not too expensive.
No, it's not. It's a good price point. And what I am seeing, and it excites me, is like, I know this is by Princeton Press, and it's exciting to see academic publishing starting to, what do you call, it's not a hybrid, but it's like when trade press and academic press, they like have a middle ground.
We're talking about an academic press with a trade arm.
Yes. It excites me to see more of those projects. And I keep saying it would be wonderful if more academic presses had audiobooks, just because I think we've seen audiobooks are very, very popular. And I think it's why podcasts are popular. I think it's why it's great, like what Heather Cox Richardson is doing. I think there's a lot of great examples. What you do, of course, Lem. So how can everyone, find your work, anything you want to plug, how they can get their hands on your book?
Well, certainly you can find the book in all of the places that you used to finding books.
Yeah.
And I have a website, lcassuto.com. I'm on different forms of social media, and I invite any listener to this podcast to sign on, follow me. I'll be glad to make it worth your while.
Oh,
But
wonderful.
in the short run, I'm glad to have spent this hour with you.
Me too. I truly appreciated you are a lightning rod in my life for what it means to be an academic and how we can do academia. Because I think even in our conversation, communication, collaboration, it takes us coming together and not doing it in silos. Uh,
Thank
yes.
you so much. I'll
Thank
carry
you,
that.
Len. I so appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
And you.
Okay, bye bye.